As gardeners and homesteaders, I feel that one of our most important tools are our hands. Most of us habitually wear sturdy footwear to protect our feet, but quite often we use our hands in our work, gardening and general construction work on a homestead without thinking about protecting them. And what that means is that they quite often suffer considerably. Now, I know when I was young, that's the way I grew up, just using my hands for anything from mechanical to gardening, and my hands did suffer for it. But in recent years, I've come to using gloves, and I've become a little bit of a collector of gloves these days. I've got a range of gloves that I'd like to show you today that I use quite regularly, and I'll go through those and explain what I use each one for, because they each have a particular purpose. Okay, my first go-to set of gloves are these gardening gloves. Now, this particular one is made by Cyclone. I will say this video is not sponsored. I generally choose this brand because I find it of reasonably good quality and reliable. The rubber facing gives you good grip when you're gardening, and while these are a little warm, they're not overly hot. You've got some ventilation in this back area. They do come in multiple sizes. They're color coded on the end here, and so there is yellow, blue, and I think the white is the medium one. So it allows you to distinguish if you've got more than one size in the family. One of the downsides of these gloves is that they will get wet if you're gardening in a wet condition. So it's a good idea to have more than one pair. I generally have a couple of pairs, so if one gets wet, then I can hang them up and let them dry while I'm using the other one. So that's my first glove, and look, for gardening, I think it's the #1 glove to have. Now, there is a thermal version of this glove. It's not made by Cyclone themselves. It's fairly thick, and it is going to keep your hands warmer on those cold winter mornings that you need to get out in the garden occasionally. The downside is that you haven't got quite as good contact with your fingers, so it's a little bit lumpy feeling. You don't really want to keep it on for too long. One tip with these, if you're going to use them in winter when it's cold, don't keep them in the garden shed. Keep them in your house where it's warm. Nothing sets you back as much as having to put on a pair of cold gloves on a cold morning. I don't use these a lot. It's only the occasional time over winter that they actually get used. Now, occasionally you do need to do some jobs in wet conditions and you don't want to get your hands dirty. Then a heavy duty set of gloves like this that you might use in the kitchen and in the house work just as well in the garden. So they're a useful addition to your gardening kit. But I don't use them a lot because your hands can sweat in them a little bit too much. So it's only really, mainly my wife uses these more than I do, and it's really only in winter when it's wet conditions that we do use those. Now, on occasion, you need to tackle some really heavy jobs and some prickly things. I have these Gauntlet gloves, which are quite heavy duty, and you can really get into them, and they're going to protect the lower forearm here where you get the break between the shirt and the glove quite often with other gloves. And I mainly use those if I'm pruning things like the brambleberries, which are prickly and are going to scratch me. These really make it a far more pleasant experience and mean that you don't come away with lots of scratches at the end. These gloves don't get used a lot, so look, this is the first pair I've bought and they're going to last quite a long time. Of course, on a homestead they could also double as a welding glove if you're only welding occasionally, because they're going to give your arms that protection. So again, a useful one to have. Now, one of my first go-to gloves was a rigger's glove, and I still keep them around. I mostly use these in relation to firewood. Look, you can see these have been used, they're fairly dirty. I keep a pair in the car, so if you're loading timber or something like that, they're useful. One of the downsides for me, particularly with riggers gloves, is that they're often don't fit very well, and this looseness in the finger means that you don't have good feeling or grip. Because of that, as I say, they're only used for jobs that you don't necessarily need that so much. But because of the fact that they're leather and give good protection, I still keep them around. Of course, they're reasonably easy to buy and a good general work glove. My most recent addition are these cut resistant gloves. They have a rubber facing on them, as well as the cut resistant fabric at the back. Or right through, should I say. This of course has been just rubber dipped. Now I'm finding these really good, and they are becoming one of my first gloves in the workshop, and for a lot of work that I do. They are great for if you're working with cutting tin. I also use them when I'm splitting kindling, because you're going to get some protection if you do slip. But yeah, a lot of jobs I'm finding these good. One of the things about these, an advantage over the riggers gloves, is that they are fitting better, because they do also come in multiple sizes. They come in small, medium and large, so they're going to fit better. And having the rubberized surface means that you've got a good grip. You can really hang on to tools quite well and hold things that you're carrying. So I'm really enjoying these gloves, finding them really good use. One of the things here in a cooler climate in Tasmania is that they do keep your hands warmer, so quite good in winter. Maybe not so good in a hot climate. The last glove that I wanted to talk about is the Carpenter's glove. Now, I don't use this a great deal, but I do use it when I'm doing construction work. And in a garden, let's face it, you do end up doing a bit of that, and certainly on a homestead, you're often building things. This glove is giving you really good protection across the hand where you're likely to get splinters, and so if you're working with timber, boy, there's a lot of splinters I could have saved if I'd had these earlier. Having these fingers free though is really great advantage working with fine things like holding screws, and you know, if you need to manipulate tools, you have the feeling of the fingers and they are free. Using your pencil, it really helps in that way. Now, yes, these fingers are going to get dirty, and you're going to actually potentially suffer injury if you're not careful in that area. But having the extra motor skills in those fingers is of great advantage when you're doing the finer construction. But the protection as well, it just works great. I use them, you know, building garden beds and that type of thing. I find them really useful, and I'm really glad I have them. They will last a long time because you know, you're not using them all the time on a homestead, unlike a professional, and while they cost a little bit, that investment is worthwhile. So that's the selection of gloves that I use, and hopefully that's been of some help to you, give you some ideas as to what gloves that you can use too, and hopefully it'll help you miss out on some of those splinters that we just don't need to get.